Indianapolis Colts general manager Chris Ballard said all the right things in his postseason press conference. But do we believe him? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd over at horseshoehuddle.com, and I'm joined, as always, by our Crocs on the ground, Jake Arthur. Yes, we're putting Crocs back in there because the snow's starting to melt. We're going to eventually get back into those Crocs, right, Jake?
We're getting like 4 more inches as we speak. Today is hell on earth.
Never mind.
Snow boots on the ground.
Never mind. Snow boots on the ground yet again. We're going to keep that for the rest of the winter here. But, guys, we are reacting fully to Chris Ballard's end-of-season press conference. All, 58 minutes, you said, Jake, is on our YouTube channel. You guys can go check that out. 49 minutes. Okay, 49 minutes on the YouTube channel. That's a beast of an episode, but make sure you guys check that so you can get everything that we're talking about in today's episode. But, yeah, we're going to be talking all about Chris Ballard's press conference. We're going to talk about, can we actually expect him to make the changes that he kind of alluded to? We're going to talk about what he said went wrong with this past season. But first, let's start with our instant reaction, Jake. And I'm not going to lie, man. I caught myself a couple times being like, all right, Chris. All right. I'm like, no. This is 9 times that I've been lied to and not lied to. I really don't think Chris Ballard's like a liar or anything like that. I do think he makes promises and then falls back into stubborn habits afterwards. But yeah, I found myself a couple times being like, okay, yeah, he's saying the right things and I'm feeling pretty good. But he actually said this in his press conference too. It's like he can say all this stuff, but there's got to be actions behind his words for the first time this year. So again, it might sound good right now. And I do think some of the sound bites were good to hear for all of us. A little bit, you feel a little bit more happy and more optimistic going into the offseason hearing some of the things he said. But ultimately, man, he's got to show it. He's got to actually show some of the things he said.
Yeah, I agree. I will say just right off the cuff, I do think this had a different tone than normal. Normally, Chris is trying to sell optimism for the coming year and like what they already have in house. Like very much like a couple bad bounces went our way and we were real close. We're real close, but we've got the right guys. We like our guys, which is one of the favorite bingo checkoffs, which I don't think he said it all today. No. But he's always trying to sell optimism for growth because of what they have. And I think finally we're kind of hearing him come to a realization that, number one, in his own words, they're not close. He's like 8-9's not close. So they're not close, and they have big-time changes to make. He admitted a lot of mistakes, which he normally does, but he didn't then counter them with, like, yeah buts and, like, victory laps like you and I were talking about earlier. So this did feel like there was some optimism, not because of what he was selling, but you hope he's coming to the realization that real changes need to be made. There was a lot of discussion about player acquisition and the fact that what we've been yelling about for a while, yes, guys were complacent and they didn't have any threat behind them. So, they were like, yeah, I earned this spot. And basically their play showed that they stopped attempting to earn it. Guys were just out there, I can't remember the word I'm trying to think of, but yeah, just basic complacency. Basically, he confirmed a lot of the concerns that we all had without, giving a bunch of excuses and yeah buts, which is good to see. There's been a lot of elephants in the room as well that I feel kind of got addressed. We asked about Anthony a good bit. We asked about some things with Jim Irsay in regards to like player acquisition and stuff like that. So I came away feeling rather optimistic just because it felt like all the cards went on the table this time. There weren't really any elephants left in the room to address. I feel like everything got relatively put out in the open.
Yeah, I do think he hedged his bets a little bit. Like he did put a little bit in there saying like, we're not going to go crazy in free agency still. Like we're not going to just spend just to spend. He said, I'm not going to commit to how many free agents I'm going to bring in. But aside from those couple like little hedges, he did kind of commit to being more active in free agency, to acknowledging that last year and the year before, even the way he approached free agency was a mistake. And the one thing that really stood out to me probably the most is he didn't directly call out many players by name or any players by name really in this. I mean, he got asked directly about a couple players that he, again, didn't really go too crazy on, but outside of a couple names, like outside of dishing out praise to DeForest Buckner, Michael Pittman Jr., and Alec Pierce, he kind of called out a lot of the team and a lot of players without directly saying their name. Anthony Richardson, I don't think he was very like praising of Anthony Richardson in this press conference. He did mention a couple good things here and there, but it was a pretty like curt and honest response to a lot of stuff with Richardson. And he didn't shy away from saying bringing in competition and how Richardson needs to be better and more consistent. And I like that. Like it's really what it should be. He did address a lot of the free agent guys that he brought back last offseason, that with the new contracts comes a higher expectation, and those guys didn't live up to those higher expectations. And that was the mistake that he made, was putting, all his chips in on those guys coming back and being the leaders and being guys on those second and third contracts that can take that step and really propel the locker room. And he kind of said in his press conference, it didn't really work, and that's his ultimate mistake he made. And those guys got complacent when they got paid. And I didn't expect him to have that much honesty about that. I expected some defense of that strategy while also acknowledging the bad season, but I expected a defense of that. Instead, it was pretty brutally honest. He was also brutally honest about a couple other players and things too. I mean, the way that he talked about the player who anonymously went to The Athletic, calling it something we can't even say on this show because we're not allowed to curse on this show. Chicken poop is what he called it about that player. Whoever that player is, I'm assuming they're not going to be back with the Colts next season. So because Chris Ballard did not mince his words regarding that player. And then also just discussing other things. He talked about Zaire Franklin's podcast stuff and was very curt about that as well. I mean, I do think he was pretty upset in this, and it didn't really seem like he was upset with himself, and there was a lot of blaming himself and all, yada, 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 like whatever. Like you made the mistakes. I don't need to hear the blaming yourself, but he did call out a lot of the players on this team, which is kind of something new for him. He typically like minces like good things with bad things with good things, and like makes everything kind of sound optimistic and positive, like you mentioned, Jake. But this one, like outside of like Pittman and Buckner, it felt like a lot of subtle shots at players he brought back and team captains and guys who didn't step up. And I thought that was the thing that spoke the most volumes in this press conference, to me at least.
Yeah, there was one thing he said where I could have, it felt like he had just watched one of our episodes or something, but he said, I'm emotional. I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm emotional and I get really attached and care about these players, and I've allowed that to bleed into how I shape the roster. Meaning, you've got some nice stories on this roster, some guys you've hit on in the middle rounds, and you care a lot about them as players to the point where you won't let them walk out the door. And then you shell out all of this money to all your in-house guys who are just average players. And then you don't, you sign 5 or 6 of your own in-house guys who are just whatever, rather than being able to maybe go get 1 or 2 difference makers in free agency. And, he said basically while he was laying at home sick all week that, he did some self-reflecting and came to some hard conclusions and hard truths, in that it sounds to me like he knows he's got to rattle some cages a little bit. It's kind of like when a parent comes to the realization that you have to be their parent first before their friend. Like, you're their GM and you care about them. You brought them into the building. Yes. But at a certain point, are all these guys going to be contributing to winning? And it felt like the first time he's really acknowledged that homegrown aspect works for a lot of guys if it's the right guys, but you can't just bring back everybody.
Yeah. And coming up, we're going to really talk about some of the specifics of what he said about like what went wrong this season and where he made those mistakes. And also we're going to talk about on the show, like, yes, a lot of these words sound nice from Chris Ballard, but actions speak louder than words. So will he actually follow through on a lot of the right things that he said on his press conference? We'll talk about that here coming up in a second.
This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's the thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax tax expert who can get to work on your return right away. There's no more waiting for answers either. There's no more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress, so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. Who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day? Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details on TurboTax.com/guarantees.
And Locked On Everydayers, it's playoff time. And if you're like me, you want to make the most out of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. We love PrizePicks so much here. We're eyeing Ladd McConkey to go more than 72.5 yards in his first playoff game, and Derrick Henry more than 1.5 touchdowns. I think those are locks. Make sure you're checking those ones out and pick ones that really work for you. Those are ones that work for us. Make sure you pick ones that work for you. It's so easy to use, and I love how fast the payouts are. Seriously, I've gotten paid out in less than 15 minutes when my picks hit, plus the weekly promos like Taco Tuesday discounts and even more value to my lineups. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, Locked On Colts Everydayers. We are back talking Chris Ballard press conference. And just to clarify with one of the comments here, we're not falling for it. Look, we're going to start off this segment by talking right here how a lot of the words were right. Again, a lot of the words were right. Like he mentioned, let's start with what went wrong with this past season. How Chris Ballard said he made the mistake of bringing back only his own guys, trusting those guys to be the leaders, but not bringing in any development or bringing in any like competition in camp. I mean, there are specific positions we can look at here. He actually mentioned cornerback, not directly, but he mentioned putting the faith in Dallas Flowers off an Achilles injury, putting in the faith in Juju Brents, who ended up getting hurt yet again. He mentioned cornerback, how that was one of the issues. And you and I thought he was fully going to take credit for corner being better than what we expected.
Yeah.
He didn't. He mentioned that as one of the ones without the competition. I know he didn't directly say these two positions, but safety and linebacker, I'm sure, are in there as well. So when he talks about what went wrong this past season, I think, quarterback was something that was kind of the undertone in a lot of it. Quarterback was certainly an undertone with it, talking about poor play from Joe Flacco at times, talking about Anthony Richardson struggles at times. But really, when it came to the defense, they mentioned the defense needed to be better and he needed more competition on defense and with the offensive line, too. He mentioned competition with the offensive line. So he went into quite a bit of detail what went wrong this past season and really put it on himself for the things that he didn't do last offseason.
Yeah, it was odd because the offensive line thing, I really didn't have a problem with the Colts offensive line depth this year. Like they drafted Bortolini and Gonzalez, who we think were hits. And yes, they put Dalton Tucker in there, but Will Fries broke his ankle, and Wesley French had a severe injury, season-ending injury as well. Like, there was some players there, they just managed to get hurt. And for the most part, the guys who went in there played relatively well. Dalton Tucker, that probably shouldn't have happened because he was a rookie UDFA. It didn't ruin them, basically. But yeah, that was one thing I didn't really know if I agreed on. But he mentioned the defensive line. He was asked about the defensive line and why the regression, at least in sacks. And he's like, I know everyone wants to point at sacks, but I think the defensive line did really well, which then led into he was asked about defensive issues, and he's like, we were not a good tackling team. So if you kind of read between the lines, the defensive line did its job opening things up, but the guys behind them, tasked with cleaning everything up and making the tackles, didn't do their jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I could see it chopping the day.
I just wanted to add one thing because I did see some people pushing back on this where, yes, I do disagree with him a little bit where he said the defensive line was pretty good this year. I don't think the defensive line was pretty good. I think they were fine. Right. I don't think they were pretty good. But the things that he did mention as things that held back the defensive line were tackling behind them, which obviously was a big thing, coverage behind them, teams going into 7-8 man protections and still completing passes.
And getting rid of the ball quick,
and getting rid of the ball quickly. And I don't disagree with that assessment. I think he's praising the defensive line a little bit too much. But when you look at a lot of the issues with the defensive line, it really was teams going into 6-7 man protections and then drawing up plays where a receiver was just going to the flat. You're not really going to get many sacks that way, rushing 4 people and leaving the flats wide open. The ball's coming out quick. I think the Colts were, they were like top 5 in like average throw time against them or time to throw against them. Teams were getting the ball out really quick against them. It is hard to get sacks that way. I do think he let the defensive line off the hook a little bit there, but the insinuation though is obviously the defensive system, which with Gus Bradley being out kind of shows that there is that accountability there, and the guys behind the defensive line, the 7 guys behind the defensive line. I do think that comment in a way kind of did call out those 7 guys about being better with their tackling, being better with their coverage, being better in, blitz, whatever it is. Like, I do think I'm not saying he took the pressure off the defensive line completely, but he did point a lot of fingers as the defensive struggles being the 7 guys behind the defensive line this past year, which I thought was interesting. What were your thoughts on that, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, I reading between the lines, I kind of felt the same way. Like, he was more so pointing towards what was going on behind the defensive line. But real quick before we run out of this segment, something I did want to mention in terms of the what went wrong category was when you're talking about quarterback. Speaking of, kind of letting people off the hook a little bit, I do wonder. Now, I think they are trying to work on how they message things about Anthony. I do wonder if they get the reality of, like, yes, this is a young kid and everything. He's got some learning to do, but quarterback has to be held to a different standard. Like, when Chris was asked about, like, Anthony's preparation, basically, like, how did it get to the point where he got benched when he was a team captain if he wasn't preparing well, all that. And then he made the comparison to your kids not cleaning their room when you tell them to, and it's like that's not the same. Like, if your kid doesn't clean the room when they're supposed to, that's not going to cost people their jobs. They're not the face of $1 billion sports franchise, and it's like, we shouldn't really be asking about holding this kid's hand through the off season, but it was a legitimate question about, like, how are you guys going to, like, make sure he's on his P's and Q's now the season's over and he's away from the facility. Like, that's your franchise quarterback, man. And we just had an episode about there's really nothing they can do about the position other than him in 2025. Nothing, at least long term. So I do still question if they get the gravity of that position. It's definitely still something I have a lingering question about after that. I didn't have a lot of unanswered questions beyond that, but I do still wonder about the Anthony Richardson of it all.
Yeah. And one more thing I want to add to this. I know we're kind of disjointed in how we're talking about what he said, but he said a lot. It was 49 minutes. We're trying to get this
Yeah.
into 10 minutes of a segment here. He did specifically mention the lack of a receiving threat at tight end as a big issue this past season. So all of you Tyler Warren to Indy people out there, make the jersey edits. Make the jersey edits. Make all that. Send it to Chris Ballard's address. Do all the stuff you need to do. Don't be too creepy with it, but be a little creepy with it if you really want to make it happen. So yeah, Tyler Warren to Indy completely confirmed, obviously, in this press conference here. But coming up, guys, we're going to talk about the final aspect of this press conference. Again, all the right words were said. They mentioned what went wrong this past season. What can we expect this offseason? Does he actually change? Is the 9th time the charm? Do we see a new Chris Ballard in year 9? We'll talk about it here in just a second.
From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers, you guys can bet $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. So an enticing one for me, I know we already kind of talked about the Chargers there with Ladd McConkey, but Chargers-Texans, the Chargers are 2.5-point favorites in Houston. And we know all about Houston here. Don't count them out. They won a playoff game last year. They're a scrappy bunch. I'm not going to completely write off C.J. Stroud as someone who is taking an enormous regression. I still trust them a little bit. So that one's enticing to me, but do what you will with your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Zach. So we've digested all this. Again, there's 50 minutes of talk from this whole thing. Some good, some bad. But overall, a different tone than normal in his State of the Union address. So realistic expectations, knowing he's not just going to turn over a whole new leaf and change the way he does everything. What do you get the vibe that we might see done differently or something to fix this mess?
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to see a massive spending spree from Chris Ballard. Like, ultimately, that's just not in his DNA. And I'm not going to come out of this press conference being like, the man has finally completely changed. He's going to go full Ryan Grigson, Andre Johnson coming out of retirement to play for the Colts again. I'm not really coming to that realization from this press conference. But I do think he backed himself into a corner a little bit in terms of having to be somewhat more active in free agency. Like, what he did last year in free agency, only bringing in 2 outside free agents, Raekwon Davis and Joe Flacco, he backed himself into a corner today, saying, like, basically not being able to do that again this offseason. So in a sense, I do think we see a more active Chris Ballard, and I think it's going to trend towards the more active that we've all wanted, which the thing that we've all been begging for him to do since like 2020, essentially, because 2020 he had a good offseason, and 2021 he had a good offseason, I think, too, where he brought in guys like Stephon Gilmore, I think was 2021 going into 2022. Justin Houston signing was in there. We had the Phillip Rivers signing in there. Like, these were pretty solid signings, but then they were also sprinkled in, the Chris Reed signing was in there, which was awesome back in the day. We had, the TJ Carey signing was in there. Rodney McLeod signing was in there. Like, these were good signings from mid-level guys, like a couple mid-level guys like the Gilmores and the Justin Houstons. Rivers you can call like a high level, but for a quarterback that was like a mid-level contract. And then you have the TJ Careys, the Chris Reeds, the Rodney McLeods. It was like, those were just good free agency periods. Like, it was just like 4 or 5 signings of free agency, but you were making your team better. You were bringing in veteran guys, leadership guys to make your team better. And we saw, 2022 Colts were brutal on offense, especially, but we saw like better performance from the defense in 2022. We saw better teams in 2021 and 2020 with this approach. I don't need him to go get the number 1 free agent at every position and say, there we go, this team is set. But like, use free agency. That's the only thing we've ever been begging for him to do. Just use it. I don't know if that's going to change because he is who he is at this point. Like, again, we're in year 9 of this, and more often than not, he's not used free agency. But if he can just get back to like 2020, 2021 style free agency, where it's like 4 or 5 times, or maybe even goes crazy and goes the 2018 route with free agency, where it's like 10 free agents brought in along with a Danico Autry and a couple other like really solid like mid-level guys, I'd be very happy with that. Like he has shown, outside of a couple free agency misses here and there, but he has shown the ability to scout free agents and identify which guys are good fits for his team. He just doesn't use it enough. I mean, Samson Ebukam was a recent one who, I mean, I know he didn't play this past year, but the year before he played, he was awesome. A great signing, really good signing for the team. Even like a Samuel Womack they found on waivers. Great find. Like he is good at identifying which guys out there fit the team and make the team better. Just be more aggressive. And he mentioned this, like they are like, he trusts his process to identify the free agents, but they need to close out these deals. Close out the deals. Just close out the deals. We need more talent in here. We need better players in here. I know he's got the ability to scout it and the ability to bring these guys in. Just close out the deals. Be more aggressive. I don't need 12 free agents signed. I don't need 20 free agents signed, but like, give me 4, 5, 6, like guys that you really believe in. Some mid-level deals in there. Like, and I'm happy. That's all I want. I don't know if we get it, but this press conference, if you are someone who wants what I just was ranting about there, I think this press conference kind of backed him into a corner where he does need to do that at least a little bit this offseason, especially compared to last offseason.
Yeah, and I do like the fact that he mentioned it's not like they don't try to get guys, they just don't finish, they don't close. It's like, don't be the team that loses out on player X because you won't give them a bag of fun-sized Milky Ways or something. Like, close the deal. He said Jim Irsay is willing to spend and make sure they can close those deals. That's great to hear. But one reason I think it's realistic that we see an uptick in outside additions is they're going to have a new defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
They need to give this guy some of what he wants, whoever it is. It's going to be some variation of the system they've been running. They're not going to do anything drastic. There's not a ton of like 3-4 stuff anymore, but you're a nickel or some sort of other sub most of the time anyway. So it's going to be something similar to what they already run, but maybe more aggressive, perhaps, what it sounds like. But this new guy's going to want some guys that fit what he does, maybe even from his old team. So that alone, I think, is going to be good for at least a couple of additions. But no, just quit being the guys who, on principle, you have this hard line, I'm not going to go above, and that's final. Like, that is not going to get you anywhere. Like,
yeah,
these guys in the locker room, sure, that may threaten their spot, like on the depth chart or whatever, but they want to win. They want other good guys on their team. I mean, the DeForest Buckners of the world said he's going to be recruiting this offseason. So that's kind of the big thing for me. Like, close those deals. I believe them when they say they've tried to make deals before, they just don't close. Because like the draft thing, they tried to get into the top 10 and get up to where the Giants were, and then they just said no. And then for some reason, it's like, well, that was a nice try. We're done. Like, you were going to be so aggressive to go up and try and get like a Brock Bowers or Malik Neighbors, but then you got denied. And it's like, well, we're not going to try and do anything like that anymore. Like, finish and like, don't be deterred if you're denied the first time. Like, just keep going. And if it's 2 or 3 quality free agents versus 5 or 6 of your own in-house guys, but you're going to upgrade over them and they're more expensive, do it, man. Like, you got to try. Like, you're not going to get anywhere if you just keep relying on the lowest level free agents and then you hope your draft class saves you every year. That clearly has not worked.
Yeah, and I firmly believe in his philosophy of don't pay C players A money. I fully believe that. I am 100% on board with that. Don't pay C players A money, but you can pay C players C plus money. You don't have to pay C players C money. You can pay C players B minus money. Like, you can pay a little bit more than what you value these guys at, because ultimately having them versus not having them is worth the extra $1 million per year, to make your team better. So I do think he needs to be at least a little bit more aggressive in closing these deals. Will it happen? Again, we'll see. I do think they will be looking for like leadership type guys though, and like veteran players on the market this offseason, because again, reading between the lines, I don't think there are many veteran like leaders on this team that the Colts fully trusted anymore. Like, again, he specifically called out Pittman and Buckner as two captain guys that he wants the rest of the team to emulate. But aside from that, I don't know if he calls out the other captains as being like leadership guys that he wants the team to emulate. So we'll see. We'll see if anything changes with Chris Ballard. This was at least a good step in terms of backing himself into a corner to at least come out a little bit more aggressive this free agency, but now he's got to back it up. And I will say this, Jake, the first domino that I think needs to change to show that he's serious to admitting his mistake of last offseason of only re-signing his own guys and then backing off. A lot of these in-house guys can't come back.
Correct.
I think that is the first, because I swear, man, if I see a big contract extension for EJ Speed and Julian Blackmon and Dio Dangbo, and I'm not saying you don't bring back any of these guys, but if I see those things like the day before free agency, all of a sudden all those guys coming back and the Colts only have like $5 million in cap space, then these were a lot of empty words that he said today, you know? So I think that's ultimately will be the biggest showing prior to free agency if he's going to change, is what happens with these in-house guys. Because personally, especially when he called out a lot of the back seven, if you see EJ Speed and Julian Blackmon come back, I think a lot of this was empty words. He
said they need to get better at safety. And for what it's worth, Nick Cross was the better safety this year, the guy who they've invested the time in, that they can see him getting better. That's the clear choice to me.
Yep. And one thing I will say before we get out of here, though, shout out to all the Indy Beat guys there. Not only our boots on the ground or our Crocs on the ground, Jake Arthur, but every single person that was there asking questions today. I thought they were really professional, really aggressive in a professional way today. And I really liked how you guys held him accountable on a lot of things. I think it was a great press conference from the Indy Beat guys. And I really wanted to shout those guys out. My colleagues, Jake's direct colleagues that he sees every day, my colleagues I see over the internet. But I do appreciate all those guys for all their work they did today and every day. Honestly, I think they're great all the time, but especially today, they knocked it out of the park today. And we want to thank all of you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today. Next, go find Locked On NFL. First, the Madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. And if you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. We're also on TikTok for the next 2 days that it's a real thing, and Instagram. Also subscribe to us on YouTube wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love your guys' ratings, reviews as well, and we'll catch you guys back here maybe tomorrow afternoon. We have a lot of stuff coming. Maybe tomorrow afternoon, if not early next week.